You're listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. You can hear the show live Monday through Friday from 9 to 11 on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN and streaming at accesswdun.com. You can find all things Martha Zoller at marthazoller.com. It is the Martha Zoller Show, and joining me right now is Representative Andrew Clyde. And since we talked last week, a lot has happened as far as an extension of the continuing resolution, and lots of talk about budgets, lots of talk about borders, and lots of talk about aid to other countries. So we said let's just go right back to him and get an explanation of what's going on. Andrew, how are you?
Well, good morning, Martha. Great to be with you. Thank you.
So just give us a quick update of what's happened since the last time we talked, and then what is going to happen next?
Well, I think, as you know, on Thursday, late afternoon, the House voted on another continuing resolution. Basically the same thing that we voted on in November, just extended it into early March in a laddered kind of effect. And one of the interesting things about that vote, Martha, is that you had 107 Republicans, only 107 Republicans vote for it, and 207 Democrats. That's 100 more Democrats voted for it than Republicans. And if you look at the trend, you go back to the Financial Responsibility Act, where you saw 149 Republicans voted for it, but more Democrats. And then in September, November, the CR, for those two CRs, about 126, 127 Republicans voted for it. And now we've got 107. The trend is going down. Republicans, fortunately, more of them are coming to our side. As you know, I voted against the CR. I don't believe that that is the right way that our country should be going forward, spending at the Nancy Pelosi levels with the Joe Biden policy attached to it, and then literally wanting to spend more money in FY24 than we actually did in FY23. That's not what Republicans came to Congress to do in the majority. I don't believe the country gave us the majority so we could spend more money and continue Biden's policies. We need to absolutely reverse course on that, and we need to put our policies in place, which is why we passed 7 appropriation bills on the House floor, which funded, at that point, 85% of the government was funded with those 7 appropriation bills. With our policy in them, we needed to fight on that, all right, and on the border. The border is the number one issue across the country. It is affecting every city, every state, every county in some way, whether it's through fentanyl, people dying from fentanyl overdoses or being poisoned by fentanyl, not really knowing what they're taking, whether it's by fentanyl or whether it's by the increase in crime that's coming across the border from the millions upon millions of people since Joe Biden became president that have come across, or the terrorists that have come across. You've got over 300 of them on the terrorist watch list that we have caught. Those are just the ones we've caught. And, we don't know how many we haven't caught because it's estimated about 1.7, 1.8 million of those coming across the border are what are called gotaways. We don't know. We know they were there. Somehow they tripped a sensor somewhere. We got them on video, but we couldn't actually catch them. And so that's very, very concerning. But that's the number one issue, Martha, is border. And we should have been fighting on about our border. What is happening now? Because here's what I think. We've got to get back to what you talked about, which is passing the appropriations bills on time, because that's the way to do the process. Because, you went to Congress, you took an oath, you agreed to the rules, you guys vote on the rules, you lost this vote, okay, but you got to live to fight another day, right? So what's happening now? Well, what's supposed to happen, and the reason we now have another month and a half, is that we're supposed to be working on appropriation bills and finishing our appropriation bills. What they call the 4 corners.
Right? We're still talking about last year, or the year we're in. Well, actually, the year we're in.
We're talking about the year we're in, 2024. Right. That's correct. There was a new agreement on a top-line number by the 4 corners, and they call the 4 corners by the Senate Majority Leader, the Senate Minority Leader, the Speaker of the House, and the House Minority Leader. Those 4 individuals right there They agreed upon a new number of spending, a higher number, $69 billion above the Financial Responsibility Act, and actually, Martha, $82 billion above what we had actually been able to do in the appropriations process, which was cut spending. We had cut $13 billion out of the appropriations. We were down to $691 billion, and now we're going up to $773 billion. And so what's happening is they're taking that additional money and reapportioning it across the 12 appropriations total, including the 7 that we've already passed, which I completely disagree with. We don't need to be spending more money when we are $34 trillion in debt and going higher and higher. Literally every solitary minute we are borrowing money, and that we are on the course for financial collapse. When we are spending, we will be spending almost $1 trillion in interest. Almost $1 trillion.
Right.
That is a stunning figure.
So
we can't do that.
So does it concern you that, okay, so you got Joe Biden, who may or may not be the nominee, we don't know, but at this point in time, he's a guy that does not really talk about reducing spending, okay? The former president, with all the great things that he did increase the debt dramatically, and he really doesn't talk about fiscal responsibility as one of the issues he talks about. Nikki Haley, who does talk about it, she was an accountant by training and was a governor of a state where you had to balance the budget. So does it concern you that even among the new leadership we're considering, whoever ends up being president of the United States, that they don't really talk about this issue? That nobody is owning this issue except for people like you, Andrew.
Well, hey, as you saw, we had 106 Republicans vote against this bill, all right, against the continuing resolution. Our numbers are growing, Martha. There's some hope in that right there.
Good.
People, the light's coming on in some people's, eyes, and they're seeing that this is not the way that we should be moving forward. It's gonna lead to financial instability and financial collapse at some point in the future if we don't get this under control. And we have seen this time and time again. Congress loves to spend more money. I don't. I want to cut our budget. I want to cut the amount of money that we're spending because that's what, we in Georgia have a balanced budget amendment. We have to spend within our means. We should have that exact same thing in Congress.
Do you think, because I know you support President Trump to be the nominee for the party, is he listening to people like you? Because he doesn't talk about fiscal responsibility much. Do you think he's listening?
I think he will listen to us. Absolutely. President Trump's a businessman, just like I'm a businessman. He doesn't spend more than his revenue that he brings in. He understands that principle, I think, as well as anyone does. So now, granted, yes, you're right about the increase in the debt, but you had COVID during the President Trump's
sure. No, and look,
that's an anomaly.
I've always said about him that, he's a real estate guy, so he loves leverage. Okay, he's not afraid of leverage. I mean, you look at his business career, he's not afraid of leverage. So it's and again, I don't want this to be about him. What I want to see is hope that things are going to change. That's what I want to see.
Well, I firmly believe, I believe in good things in the future, a positive outlook. I firmly believe that we as Republicans will get to that point that we're finally saying enough is enough. We need to be fighting on the border issue. That is the one issue that truly unites us
100%.
Completely. And we need to be using our, funding of our government to leverage that.
What are your goals for this week in the Congress?
Well, honestly, we need to continue. We have not seen where this new higher number is apportioned out amongst the appropriation bills yet. Once we get that, we'll be able to see what else we can cut. Honestly, I don't want to spend $773 billion on non-defense discretionary money, which is every other three-letter agency in the federal government except the Department of Defense.
We've got to figure out how to get that mandatory spending on the table where you can at least have a discussion about it without somebody saying you're trying to throw grandma off the cliff. What I'm trying to do is save grandma, you know?
Right, absolutely. I'm 100% with you on that. You know, we need to save grandma. We need to save Social Security. We need to save Medicare. I mean, that's, you know, was a promise to the American people that we must keep. All right. But, you know, there was this talk of a mandatory spending commission. I think that's a good idea. You know, it's a very political issue across the board. But I think that we should have, you know, a bipartisan commission to look at it and make some recommendations, a little bit like the BRAC Commission.
Andrew, Clyde, I appreciate you always being available. And I know we go back and forth a bit, but I think we're all ending up for the best of this country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martha. Always great to be with you.
It's local radio, and that's why you're listening. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Steve Moore's here with me right now. And Steve, the one thing that surprised me about the DeSantis thing is that he didn't even wait a second to say he was supporting Trump when they've been saying some pretty nasty things about each other for the last couple of weeks.
Well, Martha, good to be with you. That is politics, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Listen, a couple of things about Ron DeSantis. I mean, Ron DeSantis is America's governor. He's been a spectacular governor for Florida. Amazing what he's done on taxes, on school choice, on, you know, fighting against ESG and crazy liberal policies. So, you know, I think he is very likely to be one of the front runners in 2028. Remember, when Trump is elected, he can only serve for one term because he's already served a term. So, you know, I have nothing but respect and really gratitude for the job that Ron DeSantis has done.
But he did have a little difficulty connecting that message.
He did.
And I think
he did. But you know what? I mean, you're exactly right. He ran a terrible presidential campaign, and he was not a good presidential candidate. But, you know, I was thinking about this morning, I was thinking, you know, if you look at some of our most successful presidents, including Ronald Reagan, many of them had to run once or twice before they got it right. And
no doubt about it. But even Ronald Reagan was gaining momentum all through 76. He just didn't have enough momentum to unseat Gerald Ford.
That's true.
And the thing about DeSantis and what I think he needs to do in whatever postmortem he does is that he needs to say, okay, I'm one of the few people that started out high and lost ground through the entire campaign, no matter how much money I spent. And so he's got to be honest about that. And I think one of the things is he's kind of hard to get to. He's not one of those people that's easy to relate to. And I think he'd be great. I mean, policy-wise, no doubt about it. I mean, Florida does a fantastic job. And, the way he'll be a 28 contender, though, is if he's the VP. And it'll be interesting to see who plays that out.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you just said. You know, he needs a little bit of he needs to go to charm school, because he's got a great, I'm just talking about what he's done.
Sure, of course.
And if he could do for America what he's done for Florida, that would be a great thing. Look, Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. It's probably, 90% chance right now. We'll see how Nikki Haley does in New Hampshire. She might sneak off a win there, but I guarantee you she's not going to win in South Carolina, and that's coming up in a few weeks as well, and that's her home state. If she loses South Carolina, it's basically over. Look, Trump has made an amazing comeback, and a lot of people kind of scoffed when he said he was going to run again, but he still has a grip on the party because people like to,
well, he's definitely
Republicans.
He's definitely redefined conservatism. That is for sure.
He has, and in a good way and a bad way. And I would say this though, that if it comes down to and I think it's a lot less likely that Biden is going to be the nominee for the Democrats than that Trump is.
I agree with you there.
But if it is a rematch, I do like Trump's chances. I mean, it's just compare his term in office versus Biden's. Biden's has been a disaster in almost every area, whether it's the border, whether it's crime, whether it's the economy, whether it's inflation, whether it's the national debt, need I go on. So, we'll see how this all fares. But I want to say this too. I think Trump has been, the good Trump lately. He's really been talking about issues. He stopped with the name calling. He was magnanimous after winning in Iowa. And so if he could stay like that, I think his chances greatly improve.
So my biggest concern, as you know, with the former president is he really never talks about fiscal responsibility. He never really talks about that. Now, he's starting to a little bit. Now, I'm sure that has something to do with you because I know you're helping in that area. But that is my biggest concern is that we're really seeing a fiscal cliff here. And he is pandering into you can't even bring up Social Security without being called someone that wants to kill grandma, and I just don't, we've got to bring everything up, Steve. And if we don't create an environment where we can actually look at the budget and get things done, we're never going to get out of this.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. And, America needs a change. We need to have, this is such a great country. There's no reason we can't,
we'll
can't have high growth.
Yeah.
It is. And, Biden just doesn't put America first. That's the problem.
Yep. You're right. You're right. And I think you're a little more aggressive than I am. I don't think it's a 90% chance. I think it's a 98% chance. I think there's about a 2% chance. And I'm a Nikki Haley fan. I believe everything she says as far as why we need to go with someone younger. I believe we need an accountant in the White House. Okay, so I admit my bias, all right? Unlike some people, I admit my bias. But I also believe that's what primaries are for. Primaries are for you fighting for the people you believe in, and then you have to sometimes make compromises in the general.
That's right. And look, Trump won in 2016, in my opinion, because a lot of, especially suburban women, who didn't really like Trump, but they didn't like Hillary much either, kind of held their nose and voted for Trump. In 2020, a lot of them didn't vote for Trump. And so if he can win back those suburban women, I think he can win. It's basically 5 states, as you know. I've said this many times on your show. It's Georgia, it's Michigan, it's Pennsylvania, it's Arizona, Wisconsin. Those states are the ones that matter. And, Georgia's going to be pivotal. I really believe, I'm going to say it again, I think whoever wins Georgia will be the next president.
No, I think you're absolutely right, because we're not a swing state in the true sense of the word, but we are a state that represents the broad diversity of population in our country. And if you can win Georgia, you are pretty representative of who can win in America.
So, I know we're running out of time. I'm going to ask you a question, if I may.
Sure.
So why, because Trump, Trump won virtually every southern state soundly, resoundingly, except for Georgia, which he lost. And I wonder what's different about Georgia than South Carolina or Florida or North Carolina or Alabama? Why is it that Georgia, doesn't fit that pattern now?
A much bigger city in Atlanta with a much bigger suburban female, exurban female population. That's it in a nutshell. Atlanta is, even though Georgia is a southern state, Atlanta is so different than any of the big cities in any other by a magnitude of 5 or 6 times. I mean, Atlanta is more like a D.C. or New York or Chicago, for good or for ill, it is. Now, it still has the Southern charm, as you know, but it has a lot of people moving here from all over.
Sometimes they bring their blue state ways with them, right?
And I tell you what, our Governor Kemp, who I believe is America's governor,
is the
guy that has made it his one mission for this year politically to show that Georgia is not a purple state. He is going to do everything he can to show the kinds of majorities that he and Brad Raffensperger and the lieutenant governor got in the last election to show we are not a purple state.
Good. Well, I know with you and Joe McCutcheon, we've got a great chance. So.
Well, I know. He says you and Larry Kudlow are going to be running the economy for Trump. But I'm sure whoever the Republican president is, you will help them.
There you go. I mean, the economy needs a lot of help. I mean, $34 trillion national debt headed to $50 trillion. A border that's out of control.
And I mean, before I let you go, this budget deal last week, that they put forward, and now they have done 7 appropriations bills. I talked to Andrew Clyde this morning. He was one of the no votes. He said, we're just going to keep plugging along and try to get all these appropriations bills from the year we're in passed. Yeah. Your thoughts on that before we go?
It's fine. Look, the budget's completely out of control. It's a mess. It's a disaster. Republicans did the best they could in the House, given the fact that the Democrats control the United States Senate with Chucky Schumer running the show there and Biden running the White House. So it's a mess. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The budget is a mess. We're borrowing nearly $2 trillion a year. It's a catastrophe, and it's going to take a new president to fix this. I hate this idea of a fiscal commission because I think the Democrats are just going to, what they're going to use that for? They're going to use that to raise taxes. And we don't need a tax increase. We need to get control of government spending.
No, I think you're right. And how do we look on the Senate for this year?
The Senate, the Republicans are going to win.
Okay,
I
good.
Think, unless I think it's much. I think. Well, remember, we're starting at 50-50 because Joe Manchin's gone, so that's a pickup for the Republicans. It's automatic. So you're starting at parity, and I think Republicans are going to pick up, 2 or 3 seats in the Senate. Unless Trump implodes. I'm more worried about the House because the Democrats across the country are redistricting in ways that, they're redrawing the lines in ways that will probably help them pick up 5 seats. So that means Republicans are going to have to find 5 new seats to win to hold the majority.
Well, it'll be very important that we have a strong ticket at the top and that people will vote all the way down. And, I firmly believe that our ideas are better for the American people, and we need to keep fighting that way. And you know what? You and I need to talk about this another time, but we need to work on re-educating our kids on capitalism because those 15 to 35-year-olds are being taught that it's bad, and we've got to work on that.
Well, on the way out, I'll just say this. People should read the speech by Milei, the new, president of Argentina, who did a sterling defense of free market capitalism at the Davos Economic World Forum. And I think people there were stunned by what he had to say, but it was all true. It sounded like Milton Friedman. So people should go back, and it was reprinted in the Wall Street Journal. Brilliant. And he said, look, the problem in the world today, the reason there's so much poverty is because of socialism.
Putting the talk in news talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Right now, we're going to talk to Bill Crane from Crane's Corner, and we're going to be talking with him. We'll talk a little national politics, but I want to start out with the state politics because I was at the Faith and Freedom legislative luncheon yesterday, Bill, and it's one of my favorite events because I always leave there feeling good about the state of America. You know what I mean? And the state of the state, because the messages are uplifting. All the constitutional officers come and give their pitch. There's a lot of legislators there, so you can grab people and find out what they think about things. And it's kind of interesting. I thought this might be the year for sports betting, but and I know it's a long time for the session. It could pop up anywhere. But it seems to me what people are talking about most is school choice, CON, and Medicaid expansion. And that's a tall order to throw gambling in there, too.
The state could use the revenue. We're probably going to have a soft landing in the U.S. economy in the second and third quarters this year. And Georgia's part of that. We'll be more resilient, but it will impact our economy. And from the true-up of the Medicaid rolls that occurred this year, and people coming off of one-time aid and aid-related or funded health care by the pandemic assistance of the American Rescue Plan, we've got a new number, if you will, of people that are underinsured or uninsured, and the uptake has not been what the governor's office would have hoped on the state's own marketplace for insurance coverage. So there's a lot of push, particularly in the private sector, to do away with the certificate of need process, which allocates services and beds per hospital in each market. That's been a major player in that industry in other states, but in Georgia for decades. So if there's a pairing of those two, I agree with you, along with the largesse of the budget and people fighting over those resources, getting to pari-mutuel or sports betting is a stretch. I still think the best shot, and it's not bad to put on the ballot in an election year, is a constitutional amendment if we can expand beyond the lottery to other forms of gaming and let the voters decide this, and then come back and do the framing legislation as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, and I think there's some confusion about, to your point about the framing legislation, about what the best way to approach this is. I mean, I think the legislature would much rather have it be something people voted on than they voted on. So, we'll see what happens with that.
Well, it requires a 2/3 majority for a resolution, and it goes to the governor's office. Then it becomes a constitutional amendment, and the verbiage of the question comes later. But I think they can have a pretty open-ended constitutional question, such as, do you support the expansion of games, lottery, other types of gambling than lottery in the state of Georgia? Yes, no. And people will answer that. And then the legislature could then do some polling and seek guidance. Okay, what first? Sports betting, probably the most lucrative. Then casino gambling. Do we want to have that type of gaming in Georgia? Pari-mutuel. Kind of take them one at a time. I think they mince around with it, and they never let it actually get to the floor. And so it becomes kind of a side pocket issue that usually gets killed well before sine die.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And there was a lot of talk, obviously, yesterday about the school choice bill. And, the big challenge, and there was some recent polling of 14 districts that are Republican districts that voted against it last time, and some of the concerns that they had. And it's all about language and what it actually means, right? Where I think that what people are saying is that they are concerned, many Republican districts, especially in South Georgia, are concerned, and Northwest Georgia, they're concerned that a school choice bill is going to hurt their public schools. And go ahead.
I understand that concern. I've got a daughter who's a public school teacher, and my ex-wife are public school teachers, and there's a belief in that kind of flight to quality that a lot of students would suddenly up and out to a public school, to a private school, perhaps not even in the same jurisdiction. But I got the solution for them. Try the school choice question in either constitutional referendum or do again the enabling legislation to funding it with new revenue from new sources of gaming. They fund pre-K, and they're about to give pre-K teachers a raise, and they fund most of higher education, all of it, tuition, through the lottery. So instead of making local school systems and the states worry about loss of funding and revenue, only allow vouchers up to the amount of new revenue generated by new gaming. I mean, it's not hard to find a path to solution if you're looking for it.
Right. Well, are people open to that?
I think if you let the people decide if they want gaming, and then one of the things we fund with the new revenue for gaming would be school choice vouchers, then you get pretty much a distinct yes/no.
So it'll be interesting to follow, that's for sure. So on the final thing, which is CON, which I guess I live in an area where Northeast Georgia Health Systems is so powerful, and so is that they are really good. They and the other hospital systems will continue to stand against this, and even though you hear people like Speaker Burns saying he's open to it, I just think when it comes right down to it, unless they trade it for Medicaid expansion or something like that, I don't think it's going to happen.
I agree with you, but I do think the horse trade is underway. So here's two scenarios, just more for the listeners, of what impacts a certificate of need situation can have. So some of the highest quality cancer care in the state of Georgia with the best outcomes for patients comes out of they've renamed it again, the Cancer Centers from America that are in Noonan, Georgia. When they set up shop without a CON, they were required by the state of Georgia to basically bring in 65% of their patient base and be able to demonstrate that, to receive their services, most of which, of course, were insured. But to demonstrate their patients didn't draw off the patient base of other area hospitals and smaller community hospitals. And for a decade, they did that. They survived that because that's rather expensive to transport your patients, to fly them in, then drive them, et cetera, particularly when they're coming in for long periods of time or recovering from chemotherapy. But they did that. And that cancer center, again renamed, is still there. You also have situation now where the Atlanta Medical Center was owned by Wellstar with CONs of 600 beds with a facility in Atlanta, another down in East Point, which they have walked away from, and the four big players in Midtown Atlanta want to divvy up those beds, Grady, Piedmont, Emory Crawford Long, without building those beds to basically protect another player from entering into that market, or for the Atlanta Medical Center from reopening. So it is rather monopolistic. It does make the big players bigger. And for smaller community hospitals that are literally starving and really only surviving, and I'm not talking about North Georgia Regional, that's one of the best hospitals in the state, they are overly dependent on Medicare and Medicaid patients just to keep the doors open.
Well, we'll see how this all plays out. Now, I would just want to get your quick analysis of what happened last night in New Hampshire. Now, and just let me just preface this by, I like primaries. I think people have a right to have a choice in more than two states in America. And I am supporting Nikki Haley. I don't mind saying that. But I don't think she should get out just because, I mean, Bill Clinton didn't get out when he finished second in New Hampshire, and he ended up winning the nomination. So what are your thoughts about last night?
Donald Trump had a strong win. Nikki Haley gave the better speech. Wasn't a surprise there. I think she's certainly hanging in for South Carolina and possibly for Super Tuesday. I think net GOP and independent voters who voted in GOP primaries, we're looking right now at about 250,000 Americans. There are 330 million of us. And one thing that doesn't get a lot of discussion, particularly on outlets that are very favorably disposed to President Trump, a conviction on any one of those 91 felony charges, in all the polling I've seen, makes a substantial difference in would you vote for a candidate for president or would you vote for Donald Trump if he had a felony conviction. And that's a very real possibility that's going to stay in place throughout the GOP nominating contest. He may not go to trial in most of these cases till a year from now, and he may be able to pardon himself if he's reelected on the federal charges.
Or he may not be able, since he will, if he wins and he's president, he may not be able to be tried till he gets out of office.
Correct. So there are all of those what-ifs that are very unusual to this process, but almost never since 1976 have we had a nominee in either party win Iowa and New Hampshire with a decisive majority. But also remember, as of last night, it was down to a field of two. And on the Democratic side 4 years ago, it was still 12, and on the Republican side in 2016, it was 14. I do take Nikki Haley's point well. She went from 2% in the early polls last night to 44. She is 11% behind him in New Hampshire. If she gets clobbered in South Carolina, which the polling data would indicate she is or will, but the polling data was indicating she was going to get beaten much worse in New Hampshire. The last polls I saw put it at 12, 15, 30, 20 points spread, and she's closing that gap. So I think there are enough independents as well as non-party aligned voters in many of those states through Super Tuesday who do want another choice besides Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Then it's worth playing that out. You know, Donald Trump's got the resources. He's got the support base. That isn't going to change. If she can financially stay in, John McCain stayed in long after his money ran out, stay in.
Bill Crane, thanks for being with us today. It's always great to talk to you.
Take care.
It's where North Georgia comes to talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
It's the Martha Zoller Show. Lisa Wexler's here with me today. And as you know, Lisa is in Connecticut, which is right next door to New Hampshire. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this New Hampshire primary that had a big turnout, about 100,000 more than it normally does. And we're going to talk about that. Lisa, how are you?
I'm good. You know, it's interesting about the immigration because I've had this whole colloquy with somebody else about immigration just this morning. And I do think, we can get to New Hampshire in a sec, but I do think if you look at a lot of the stats, Biden can claim that he actually deported a higher percentage of the illegal immigrants under his administration than even Trump did. But by actual numbers, there are more people coming in under the Biden administration. He doesn't take responsibility. He doesn't blame that on himself. He says it's because conditions in those countries are poorer. But you know that case with 5-4, Martha, it struck me that he might have won the battle but lost the war. Because we all know that know these things. I was shocked it was 5-4. Federal preemption on immigration matters is a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer.
Right.
And it should have been 9-0, okay, because the issue of who is supposed to control our national borders is really exclusively exclusively
Absolutely.
a federal issue.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay.
I agree with that.
Right. So, okay, so Supreme Court said that, which we already knew. And then he wins, right? So he wins the battle. It's his Justice Department winning. Okay, yes, the feds are in charge. But the perception is, by the feds being in charge, that they're not doing a good job. So if you're a politician, you're winning the battle, but you're losing the war. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I
like
do.
The people are like, well, thanks a lot. Great.
And look,
so now we have to cut the wires and they have to come in.
Well, and over the years, I've spent a lot of time on the southern border. I was lucky enough to be able to spend some time at Fort Bliss, which is right there on the border. I mean, they deal with this all the time, and they actually use people in that part of the border on that military base. They use mostly Department of the Army on horseback. They don't use actually military.
Wow.
Okay, but because it's so rough. You know what I mean? It's not an area that is easily crossed by anybody. But they use Department of the Army because of posse comitatus. You can't have troops on the borders, but you can use Department of the Army personnel and try to help people get through. And in those, when I was there in 2005, obviously it was just the random few people that were coming across that needed water or maybe medical attention. So it was a very small number of people coming across. But in the visits I've done since then, one of the challenges, and this is the thing I did not understand, and this really just shows that they're not communicating. Texas is not communicating with the feds, and the feds are not communicating with Texas. Because, for example, the buoys that they put in the Rio Grande, which is one of the things, this isn't what was in this case, but it was previously, actually saved a lot of lives. Because it kept people from crossing at that river, which is very dangerous. It is very dangerous. And what it was doing was getting people to not cross at the river and go to the checkpoints. Okay, so in that case, what Texas was doing was actually, from a humanitarian standpoint, the right thing to do. I just think everybody wants it as an issue, Lisa, instead of actually solving it. Because
the news came out this morning that Mitch McConnell is getting pressure from Trump not to agree to anything that would include Ukraine, aid to Israel, and some border money, because he wants to make it look bad for Biden. And I have to say, what does Trump have on Mitch McConnell that after all these years, Mitch McConnell is still kowtowing to Donald Trump?
Well, and
what has he got on him, Martha?
It isn't just Mitch McConnell. I mean, first of all, Donald Trump, and a lot of my people in my audience love Donald Trump, but he is not the nominee yet. Okay, he is not the person, and he should not be dictating policy at this point in time, period. But New Hampshire was interesting because about 100,000 more people turned out. It was. I think prior to this, 2016 was the highest turnout. This year was the highest turnout. And then there's, but it is still just the first primary. You had a caucus and a primary. About 400,000 people have voted total. It's not over yet.
Well, it's only over if Nikki Haley bends to enormous political pressure right now. Andy Sabin came out this morning. He's a major Republican donor. People are coming out that she should resign, she should withdraw, whatever it is. She should capitulate. And I hope she doesn't, because I hope more people get a chance to weigh in. But that's me. I like democracy.
Me too.
I think it's pathetic and sad that so many people get winnowed out. I think it was pathetic and sad that Ron DeSantis just left after Iowa, packed his bags in front of a non-secret vote of a demographic that does not represent America. I was shocked. But, hey, I think that what New Hampshire shows, if you look at the data, and I've been looking at historical comparisons, I've been looking at the historical comparison, Gerald Ford and George H.W. Bush, each of whom did not win when they were their nominee, and they, in those cases, happened to be the Republican nominee. One of the cracks that you could see in retrospect, 2020 hindsight, was that they did not get the biggest share of the people that were voting in the primary. And, of course, the unique thing about New Hampshire, and this is so important, is that so many of the rest of the primaries will only be Republicans that get to vote. So the parties that be will not get a sense of what will happen in November. The reason that New Hampshire was always useful, and it was very useful this time, is because this is when the unaffiliates in New Hampshire, the unaffiliates in America, get a chance to say yay or nay on the presumed party candidate. And the fact that, look, she got 9 delegates, Martha. She didn't get nothing. He got 12. She got 9 delegates. That's not insignificant.
Well, I mean, and
that
you can
shows
go,
that,
you can go even to 1992 on the Democratic primary that, Bill Clinton came in 4th or 5th in Iowa. Then he came in 2nd in New Hampshire, claimed a victory, went on to win the nomination. So I just don't think it's over yet. I think that she's got enough money to stay in at least through Super Tuesday. I do support Nikki Haley. I think that she's strong. And I had a question from a listener that if Trump's the nominee, will I be as full-throated in my support, of him that I am of Haley? But I'm just saying we're not there yet. We've got to get through this primary. And I think that Nikki Haley has shown her toughness. She has got everybody working against her. She's gone from 2% to 42%, 44%. And, I think she has earned the right to go forward. And
let's face it. I mean, and you have to say to yourself, what votes is Donald Trump going to get from continuing to speak about her dress and speak about her as a loser and all of that stuff that he always does? He went right into hate mode. He has to try and get people that haven't voted for him to vote for him. Who is he attracting? Why don't the Republicans, Ronna McDaniel and the rest, see that? I don't understand that.
Yeah,
how is he going to attract more of the centrist base with this kind of rhetoric? And he can't help himself. This is who he is.
That's who he is.
That's who he is. Yeah.
Lisa Wexler, thank you so much for being with me today. It's always great to talk to you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. It's so true. That's who he is. And Paul asked me this question where he said, I'm very interested if once decided, will you support Trump in the same enthusiasm that you'll support Haley? Well, I've already said I'll support the Republican nominee, but I say with a caveat, I'm interested to see who this third-party ticket's going to be from No Labels. I just kind of want to see who they end up with. But I will say, let me ask you this question, Paul. Donald Trump is the only one of these people that have said they won't support the Republican nominee. So basically what Donald Trump is saying, that I should win, and if I don't win, I won't support somebody else who won. So all I'm saying to you, Paul, is you need to ask from Donald Trump the same thing you're asking from me, you're asking from Nikki Haley, you're asking from anybody else that's gotten into this race. Okay? Donald Trump is only getting on the ballot easily because he has declared as a Republican. He could have done it if he declared as a Democrat also. But if he is going to use the rules of the party to be able to be on the ballot in 50 states and territories and wherever they are in these primaries, and in the general, if he becomes the nominee, then are you going to demand from him that he follow the same rules that you want me, Nikki Haley, and others to follow? That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. And we're going to keep talking about it. To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.